You know that feeling that you're kind of living right behind your eyes, inside your own head? We all feel it. But what if that's not the whole story? What if the very feeling of being you isn't just cooked up by your brain, but is actually part of something way, way bigger? Today, we are diving into some pretty radical science that suggests consciousness goes far beyond the skull, maybe into the very fabric of reality itself.
So let's just get right to the heart of it with this question. Is everything that makes you you, all your thoughts, your memories, your awareness of the world, is it really all just locked inside that 3-pound lump of tissue between your ears? I mean, the standard answer for a long time has been yes, of course, but a growing number of scientists are starting to say, hang on a second, maybe it's something more. And to really get why that question is so important, we have to touch on this thing called the hard problem. It's one thing to see how neurons fire and create electrical patterns in the brain. We can measure that. But it's a whole other beast to explain how that physical stuff creates the rich inner feeling of being alive. Why does a certain wavelength of light feel like the color red? How does a bunch of chemical reactions become the actual taste of chocolate? Neuroscience, for all its advances, doesn't really have a solid answer. And that's why some researchers are starting to look in some very, very unexpected places.
All right, so here's our game plan for digging into this. First, we're going to look for clues in a place you would never expect, the physics of plasma. Yeah, really. Then we'll ask if memory is actually locked inside our brain cells. After that, we'll get into the really controversial data that suggests consciousness might just keep going after we die. And finally, we'll try to put all these pieces together to see if we can build a whole new picture of what we are.
So to find a new way of thinking about consciousness, some scientists are literally looking to the stars. They're asking this wild question. Could the physics of plasma, the stuff that makes up the sun, actually hold the key to understanding our own minds? I know, it sounds like pure science fiction, but stick with me here, because the parallels are, well, they're pretty startling.
So why on earth start with plasma? Well, get this. About 99% of the entire visible universe is made of it. It's not some weird, exotic substance. It is the normal state of matter out there. So if we're hunting for some fundamental organizing principle of reality, it kind of makes sense to start with the stuff that most of reality is made of, right? So what even is it? Well, to put it simply, plasma is what you get when you super-energize a gas. It strips electrons away from their atoms and creates this kind of soup of charged particles. And here is the absolute key. These particles don't just bounce around randomly. They interact through electromagnetic forces to create these huge, complex structures. They show this incredible collective behavior and an ability to self-organize. And this is where it gets really compelling. Just like our own consciousness, plasma self-organizes. But the real mindbender here is this idea of field-based processing. Instead of information being stuck in one little spot, it exists everywhere, all at once, in this interconnected field. This could be a huge clue to solving what's called the binding problem. How does your brain take the sight, sound, and smell of a flower and merge it into one single unified experience? Well, maybe it's because that experience isn't happening in millions of separate neurons, but in one unified conscious field.
Okay, so if consciousness itself could be a field, that opens up another massive question. Where do we keep our memories? The textbook answer is that they're stored in the little connections between our neurons. But if this field theory has any weight, maybe our experiences are recorded in other places too.
And the clues for this are scattered all over the place. You have these wild reports of cellular memory, where organ transplant recipients start having cravings or memories that belong to their donors. Then there's proven epigenetic memory, where things like fear can actually be passed down through generations in animals. And there's even research into bioelectric codes that shows our body's own electrical fields hold the blueprint for how we grow and heal. All of these point to the idea that memory is stored way beyond just the brain.
And this quote just nails it. It perfectly captures the thread connecting all these ideas. Your brain isn't just a chemical computer, it's an electrical generator. It's constantly creating these huge electromagnetic fields. And if some of these theories are right, it might be inside that field, not in the brain cells themselves, where consciousness, our awareness, actually happens. It's an idea that bridges the gap between that cosmic plasma model and our own biology.
Okay, this is where we take a deep breath and venture into the most controversial, but also some of the most fascinating scientifically investigated territory. If consciousness is a field and memory isn't just in the brain, then could some part of it stick around even after the body stops working? Let's not speculate. Let's look at the data.
Now, we are not talking about hypnosis or vague feelings here. This is about decades of systematic academic work. At the University of Virginia, a psychiatrist named Dr. Ian Stevenson investigated over 2,500 cases of young children who reported detailed memories of past lives. And his gold standard, the thing that made his work so important, was verification. He and his team would actually track down the facts, confirming specific details that there's no way the child could have possibly known.
Now, it is absolutely essential to approach this with a really balanced critical eye. On the one hand, you have these incredible phenomena, like kids born with birthmarks that perfectly match the fatal wounds of the person they claim to have been. But on the other hand, mainstream science offers some very sober counterarguments, right? Things like unconscious memory, pure coincidence, or maybe cultural influences. The key takeaway here is that the debate is very much alive, pitting this extraordinary evidence against the very real need for a repeatable, physical explanation.
And there's another completely different line of evidence, near-death experiences, or NDEs. Researchers have studied cardiac arrest survivors who come back and report these incredibly lucid, structured experiences. Sometimes they even include verifiable details of their own resuscitation, all while their brains were showing zero electrical activity, a flat EEG. This is a direct challenge to the idea that the brain creates consciousness. It makes you wonder, maybe the brain is more like a radio receiver, tuning into a signal that can keep on going even when the radio itself is turned off.
Okay, wow, we've just jumped from plasma physics to cell biology to parapsychology. I mean, these feel like completely separate worlds. But what if they're not? What if they're all just different pieces of the same giant cosmic puzzle? Let's try and see how they might all fit together into one single, integrated model of consciousness.
So, one possible synthesis might look something like this. At the very deepest level, you've got quantum information, the literal bedrock of reality. The body's own bioelectric fields then organize this information. These personal fields might then tap into what the biologist Rupert Sheldrake called morphic fields, a sort of collective, species-wide memory. And the dynamic, moment-to-moment flow of our conscious experience? It could follow the very same self-organizing principles we see in plasma. It's a pretty radical idea, for sure, but it does manage to connect all the dots we've been following.
And look, this isn't just some abstract philosophical exercise. Thinking about consciousness in this way could have some profound, real-world applications. Imagine being able to treat coma patients by interacting with their bioelectric fields, or helping people with PTSD by addressing trauma that might have been passed down epigenetically. This kind of research could fundamentally change medicine and therapy as we know it.
Of course, we have a very long way to go. The next steps for science are pretty clear. We need to map these bioelectric fields in incredible detail. We need to find ways to actually detect quantum effects happening in the brain, and we have to continue to rigorously and skeptically replicate all of those controversial studies on NDEs and past life memories. The real work is just getting started.
So, we'll end with a question that kind of reframes our entire sense of who we are. Is consciousness something your brain has, like a possession? Or is it something the universe does, and you are simply, beautifully, a part of it? That is a thought that could fundamentally change what it means to be human.